Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Objective Health. My name is Elliot. I'm going to be the host for today's show, and I'm joined in our virtual studio by Doug, Erica, and Tiff. Welcome to the show, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Right, so in today's show, we are going to be talking about a topic which I think is very pertinent, especially with everything that's going on in the world. If you've followed the show, then you know in the past month or 2 months, we've been primarily talking about coronavirus, about the social, political, kind of economic events surrounding that, and the repercussions that this might have on society at large and on us as individuals. Now, in today's show, we're going to be looking specifically at a phenomenon referred to as authoritarianism. This is, by definition, a basic definition of authoritarianism is it can be broken down into three different kind of personality traits, you could say. And this is, one is a degree of submission to established and legitimate societal authorities. Another one is levels of aggression in the name of these authorities. And the third is level of conventionalism. So the reason we're going to be talking about authoritarianism today is because as the hysteria has built up over the coronavirus, as we've had more intensive social measures, social lockdowns across the world, what we've all been noticing, and there's been many different news articles coming out by the day, indicating that people are generally behaving in crazy ways. People seem to have responded, or let's just say, as all of this stuff has been happening in the world, it seems that there are certain people who display this kind of personality or this set of personality characteristics, as you would define it as authoritarianism. It seems that many authoritarians have sprung up out of nowhere. And so we see that there are people who are now snitching on one another, people who are blindly following all orders from any form of authority without questioning that. And even worse, these individuals seem to be reveling in the idea of enforcing that on other people as well. And so I think that this fundamentally relates back to this authoritarian, this authoritarianism. So what we're going to be talking about today is why certain people may have authoritarian tendencies, how that can affect society, how that affects the people who live in society, why that might affect some people and not others, and then how authoritarianism, blindly following authorities without questioning, can potentially cause problems for the collective humanity, right? So, yeah. What do we got there, guys?
Well, it has been pretty crazy. I mean, it's always, I guess we could bring up the book by Bob Altemeyer it was just called Authoritarianism, wasn't it? Or something? Did it have a longer title? Anyway, I forget the name, but if you look up Bob Altemeyer, he's a Canadian psychologist who has done a lot of studies on the authoritarian personality type. And basically, he ran a lot of different experiments, I think 8 in total, where he came up with kind of a questionnaire that basically it's made as if it's not a personality, an opinion type questionnaire, but actually it's designed so that when you evaluate the answers, you come up with a kind of a score of how much somebody leads towards this authoritarian personality type. And this has been around since like the 90s, I think. It's been around for quite a while. He wrote it quite a while back. And at the time, he was writing kind of about the fundies and neocons in the US who tended towards kind of this authoritarian personality type. Nowadays, I checked out his website and he hasn't really been updating it because I was curious to see if he would talk about the left-wing kind of authoritarianism that seems to have risen more recently.
Mhm.
But anyway, if you want a more kind of thorough investigation of what authoritarian followers are like and what how they are kind of different from those who are a little bit more free thinking, it's an excellent book to read about.
Well, it's certainly apparent when this first broke out, like who the authoritarians were. Well, maybe not so much. I think at first a lot of people just got caught up in the fear. And as time went on, people are starting to relax. There's only so long that you can be living in fear. So I guess there was a bunch of people who right away fell for the whole scam or the whole nothing burger that this is. And they're, washing their hands and wiping everything down with bleach wipes. And then as things progressed, they started wearing the mask. And now that the lockdown is in place and it's easing up now, but when the lockdowns came, like those people were kind of relieved and kind of look at people funny if they see them out and urging people to stay at home, blah, blah, blah. And now that people are protesting lockdowns, these are the people who are calling the protesters, selfish, or you're going to kill grandma and all you care about is money, blah, blah, blah. So these people, I don't know, I guess the responses that these people have to the happenings that are going on kind of, it reveals their personalities deep down. And I think that these are the people, much more so than the elites at the top who are actually issuing the orders, the people who are following the orders and wanting to make sure that other people follow the orders. Those are the people that we have to fear, because the people at the top, there's very few of those. If everybody said no, they wouldn't get very far. It's the people who enforce everything that we really need to look out for.
This, I think that's really an essential point to understand. And there's a couple of people, commentators, historians, modern historians kind of thing, going back to Nazi Germany, who have explicitly stated that, that one of the reasons why the Nazi authorities had so much power, or they were feared, right? And they presented this image of having complete and total control, when in fact, simply their technology at that time was not sufficient to give them, all of the information about the population as a whole, in a way that they were presenting it as. But what I'm trying to say is that it was the authoritarians, it was the it was the citizen policeman, let's say, your next door neighbor who would snitch, who would be feeding information to the authorities, which was essentially one of the, sorry, I've lost my track of thought.
Well, yeah, just to piggyback on what you were saying, it wasn't that the Gestapo was going door to door and kicking in everyone's doors and forcibly pulling them out of the house. Of course, they did those kind of things, but most of it seemed like they were just sorting through all the information that was fed to them by people just snitching on each other.
Yeah.
And people, turning their neighbors in. I mean, that wasn't the Gestapo encouraged that, but it wasn't like they were the ones that were at the front lines of everything.
Yeah.
And really, you don't need a police force or the National Guard in the U.S. to do your regulating if you convince your citizens to do their job for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's an interesting article actually on Spiked Online by Brendan O'Neill. I think he's the editor of that site. It was called "Lockdown Fanatics Scare Me More Than COVID-19."
Mm-hmm.
And it was an interesting article. Actually, Spiked has actually been publishing a number of articles that are quite good at kind of calling out the hypocrisy of the lockdown and the fact that the economic devastation is going to be much worse than the virus ever was. But I'll just read like one quote from him. He says, "Here's why lockdown fanaticism unnerves me more than COVID-19. The coronavirus pandemic is clearly a very serious health challenge." Well, I would disagree with him on that, but anyway, we'll give that to him. "It is right that we take it seriously and that we devote as many of society's resources as possible to ensuring that..." Is this the right paragraph? I'm going to too harshly. No, this is the wrong paragraph. That's the paragraph that I would disagree with him on. But he says, "The COVID threat is not the apocalypse we were warned about. Its death rate is low. Its impact on younger people is negligible. Just 0.75% of deaths in the UK have been among under 40s, and the majority of those were people with underlying health conditions." Sorry, guys, I lost the quote I was trying to say.
I know where you're going. I see the quote that I think you want. This is it. "COVID is just a virus. It doesn't know what it's doing. It spreads to survive. But the lockdown fanatics are conscious human beings. They know, or ought to know, the destructiveness of the path that they are carving out for Britain and other nations. They know the economic calamity and antisocial culture of fear they are foisting upon society with all the mass unemployment, denigration of public services, and even death that this will cause. And yet they carry on." Is that the one?
That was it. That was the one. Yeah. I got lost there somehow. But anyway, I thought it was a kind of a good illustration of kind of the mindset of the authoritarian. It's kind of like they believe the authorities to such an extent that any consequences of believing them and acting in their name is completely brushed aside. Mm-hmm. You know, all the economic concerns, all the concerns of like health concerns that are going on right now take a second place to what the authoritarians or what the authorities have said we must do.
Yeah, like all these politicians who are enforcing these executive orders that aren't even necessarily laws. I mean, even if they were, they would be completely immoral and stupid. And even all the celebritards who are on their Instagram and virtue signaling about how great it is, and they're living in their mansions. And these dumb people that are demanding that the lockdown continue, I guess you have to be like completely in poverty. Like if you had a nice cushy desk job that maybe you had the privilege of being able to work from home during all of this, maybe that does give you a bit of a cushion where you can't like empathize with, you know, a trash collector or somebody has to go out in public and actually make their living and work with other people, not just widgets. These people are demanding that the lockdown continue. There's some celebrities, about 200 celebrities signed this letter saying that they don't want the lockdown to stop, which is just so bizarre. And it just shows how pampered and spoiled these people are, that they think that it's okay for the entire economy to be shut down or for people to be in their houses and not be able to do their jobs.
Yeah, they're very much living in a bubble. In many ways, and for those they can quite easily work from home. You know, say if they are, say it's a bureaucrat of some sort, or you know, they can quite easily plonk their laptop on their lap and do their paperwork and be done for the day. Whereas it's not the same for manual, you know, people who work jobs, manual labor, bin men, all of these kinds of things. You know, people who work in restaurants for a living, who work 3 or 4 jobs. And rely on that daily, you know, on that monthly paycheck to feed their children. And so to hear, you know, it's ironic that they feel that they can make decisions for other people based on that. It seems like, you know, they're very much entitled in many ways and privileged in many respects, that, you know, relatively disconnected from the average working class individual, which actually makes up the majority of people. But what I find interesting as well is the sheer force at which many of these authoritarian types are coming down on the general public. So in that article that Doug was talking about, he was discussing, if I remember correctly, he was discussing an experience that he had, or explaining one of his experiences in, was it Hyde Park in London?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that was a different one.
Oh, that was
a different article, but it was on Spiked as well. It might have been the same author, actually.
Yeah, okay, so it was...
Keep talking, though. I'll find it.
It was another one on Spiked, yeah. It was by a guy called Brendan O'Neill on Spiked. And, so this individual basically recounting his experience walking through Hyde Park on a sunny day in late spring, and it would ordinarily be packed full of people. And he was talking about how you have these police officers, these individuals who essentially are patrolling the almost empty park and are challenging people for sitting underneath the tree by themselves, not within kind of 20 meters of anyone else, not breaking social distancing. But in fact, you have police officers who are challenging this individual and saying, you should be at home. And now he was explicitly saying that actually, based on the laws in the UK, that this guy that he was witnessing being picked up by this police officer, the guy wasn't breaking any law, but the police officer had quite happily taken the law into his own hands and actually kind of built upon that and enforced this kind of imaginary law on this individual who was not causing anyone harm, was not a threat to anyone. But it seems as though it was just purely the police officer exercising his power. Mm-hmm. And it seems that in recent times, I mean, we've been speaking about things like police brutality, and you generally see this. You see these authoritarian types who will quite happily exert force and excessive force, exert their power over people who they feel that are somewhat below them. But in this case, it seems that actually many of these kinds of personality types are springing up out of nowhere, and they very much take pleasure in enforcing that power on others.
I have an example of that. People seem to take pleasure of it. The governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, yeah, she's a governor there. I mean, seeing the fact that she's a governor shows that she likes to be in charge of people, but she's actually taken this really to the hilt. There's people in Michigan who are protesting the restrictions and the fact that they can't go to work. And she says, because people are protesting, she's thinking of extending it, to punish them. You naughty little slaves aren't following these directives and you're out protesting. So to punish you, we're going to extend it further than we said we were, just because you're so naughty.
That's unbelievable.
So she's calling the people irresponsible, and we might have to actually think about extending stay-at-home orders, which is supposedly what they were protesting. Yet she goes around and she says that she respects their right to protest, but she doesn't respect it so much that, she'll actually listen to what they're saying. She'll just punish them like the naughty little children they are.
And this is consistent with the authoritarian personality type, and this is something that Altemeyer laid out all those years ago. This idea that when someone steps out of the conventional box, or when they act in a way that is not considered normal or non-conventional, or in this case is in some way, challenging, or in many cases not challenging, but essentially that is perceived as somewhat of a threat, and the authoritarian personality type will actually take pleasure in doing what they can to bring this person back in line. It's almost like it produces an internal sense of discomfort that people do not fit with the conventions, and they will do all that they can to try to bring that person back in line. And you see that as it's especially dangerous in the context of someone who does have authority, who does have power over others, or is in a position where they can exert that power. It means that, in fact, anyone who does wish to question the the authorities, question the official narrative, and actually, perhaps protest against that, they are, this is what they have to what they're up against.
Yeah. It's almost like there's a segment of the population that doesn't really get civil liberties. Like they don't really understand that concept. It's like they kind of feel like they should be told what to do and everybody should do that. There's a leader, that person has my best interest at heart, that person is in charge. So everybody should just do what they say we should do and everything will be fine then. And they don't recognize that these leaders are, flawed humans like the rest of us, or maybe not like the rest of us, maybe even more flawed. And that they don't necessarily have your best interests at heart. And they should be questioned at every decision that they make. They should be questioned. It's like they don't understand that. They're just kind of like, they would get mad at somebody else for not following the rules because they're not following the rules. It's like everybody would get along much better. Everything will work a lot better if we just follow our leaders.
Those people are just as dangerous as the ones who do know what liberty is, but there are rules for thee, not for me. Yeah. Like the guy who was having an affair with his married mistress, Neil Ferguson, the one who came up with all the models. Obviously, he doesn't believe his own lies, but everyone else should follow him just because, the rules don't apply to him. He's above the law.
There's been multiple examples of that.
Yeah, with these types of individuals, it seems as though their primary value, what they value the most, is authority. It's not truth. It's not liberty. It's they might claim or proclaim to value those things, and they may actually display some value for those things. They may actually value those things to some degree. However, the authorities or the word of the authorities or, the recommendations of the authorities come first. Yeah. And it's almost like, for a certain portion of the population, we can see that, okay, if the authorities are making sense, if they're kind of being rational and if they're, telling the truth, then of course it's a good thing to kind of follow the rules. But at the same time, if the authorities are objectively bad, if the authorities are lying to us, if they're telling us to do things which make absolutely no sense, then we are of a right mind to question that. Because if you value truth, if you value honesty, if you value all of these other kinds of things, then that comes before the authority. Whereas with these authoritarians, it's the other way around. It's authority comes first. And in fact, even if it doesn't make sense, even if the recommendations or the guidelines or whatever it is, the laws even if the laws do not make sense, even if they do not objectively benefit anyone, and in fact cause utter destruction, that doesn't really matter to the authoritarian. It's like they don't have the ability to see past. I don't know if it's necessarily don't have the ability to question authority. I think it's that they value it so much that they don't question it. I'm not entirely sure. It's a bit of a mind boggle for me. I think it probably is for all of us on this show. Because,
well, I think that people can argue that it's because of the school system and how people were brought up to believe in authority and respect the flag, respect your teachers, respect adults, put your hand on the heart and pledge allegiance and all of that. But everybody pretty much on earth that are living at this time went through that sort of system, no matter what country they were raised in. So I think it's something that is innate in certain people. And we can't figure out what that is.
I think that's true. They're trying to blame it as well on like helicopter parenting and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That because the parents are basically in complete control of their kids' life, they schedule their play dates and all that kind of stuff. And they're constantly watched. They're never on their own just to kind of figure out life on their own. That they are more likely to be more authoritarian when they grow up. But I don't know, because there certainly was strict parenting in the past, right? Like more, maybe not so much helicopter parenting, but really strict kind of like do it my way or you're gone kind of parenting. I'm thinking about like, the stereotypical hard dad from like the 50s or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that those necessarily would produce more authoritarian individuals. I'm more inclined to agree with you is what I'm saying, Tiff. I think that that maybe this is something that's actually just innate. That, there might be some influence by a parenting style or schooling or something like that. But I think that maybe some people just kind of have a spark in them where, I don't know how to finish that sentence.
Well, maybe also some people, they need to be hit with a sledgehammer over the head, and maybe for some people this is not enough. Until somebody is at their front door jamming a needle into their arm, they're not going to get it. And some people, even then, they'll still go along. I mean, it won't even have to come to that. But I think that in general, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of mental fortitude to be on guard and to be pursuing the truth and looking out for lies. It takes a lot of effort to keep your eyes open. And plus, you have to have some idea within you, even without anyone telling you, like something that seems kind of fishy or something that, this is not quite right. And if you spend most of your time just going along with the herd or watching television, that's a whole big part of it. If you're, watching TV 12 hours a day, of course you're not going to know anything. So why would you protest? You're just doing what the TV tells you to do.
It's almost like Martha Stout's paranoia switch, like people's brains are being hijacked on that fear that you're talking about, Tiff, like the TV or their environment, friends, family, you know what I mean? And all kind of clear thinking about questioning authority, or critical thinking maybe is a better word. They just go along with it because, they're concerned about their livelihood or, their families, you know what I mean? Or even really almost self-importance, like, well, how am I going to be perceived if I quote unquote rebel or speak out against it? It's like, seeing things on Facebook and not wanting to share them because you're afraid of the response that you're going to get, the backlash. So it's acting out of a fear mechanism.
Yeah, and I think in all likelihood that probably plays a really big role. Whether it can, I think it could, like, this is something that there's a lot of people have spoken about. When individuals are in a state of fear, then they are more likely to tend towards the kind of authoritarianism, if that is there. Or they're more likely to stick in line with what they're being told to do by the authorities. But at the same time, is that enough to explain, the sheer kind of divide that we see? I think in some cases it is. But there also seems to be just a fundamental difference. I mean, for certain individuals, it seems that no matter how hard you try to get it through to them, they just cannot. They just cannot conceptualize what you're talking about. It's almost like it doesn't compute. It's like they almost do not have the machinery to be able to think in a way that is not in line with everything that they're told by the authorities. It's like they literally do not have the capacity. And it seems like this fundamental difference, it's almost like a divide. I'm not sure what the percentage is, but it seems like some people, like Joe was saying when we interviewed him a couple of weeks ago, some people have a sense of individual autonomy. They have a sense of individualism in that they can make their own decisions about what is true, what is not true, what they want to do, what they don't want to do, and all of these other kind of things which relate to them as an individual. But then it seems like there are others, and it's difficult to quantify how many there are. I would hate to think, but it seems like there's a large number of people who don't seem to have that ability. And in fact, for them, rather than this individual sense of autonomy, it's rather the authorities, or this kind of like an external locus of control, to make decisions, to know what to think, what to do, what to believe, what not to believe. They need to be told. They need to be told by some kind of guiding force. And I think historically, religion has, to a large extent, kept people, very much being that authority figure, right? It's been that that guiding force. Whereas in our modern world, particularly in the West, as the prevalence of religion has kind of reduced, or it seems like that way anyway. People are embracing atheism and whatnot. They are more likely to, these individuals, they need an external authority figure, and well, who's the authority figure? Well, it's the government, right? It's the state. And so fundamentally, it's like, well, okay, if you have these types of people who need this external authority figure, and you take away kind of the local community, you take away, religion, you take away all of these other forms of authority, well, the only place that they have to look is the state, is the government. And then, that seems to be what happens from what I can see.
Yeah. There was actually, I know we're running low on time, but there was an article written, it reminded me of what you guys were just talking about. It was an article from like 2006 by a guy named Andrew Schmuckler. And he was talking about, it was called Moral and Exoskeletons and Endoskeletons. And it was kind of this idea that, some people have this moral endoskeleton, which is like an internal morality, right? Where it's like they have an internal sense of what is right and wrong and how they should act, all those sorts of things, versus other people who have a moral exoskeleton, so that the morality is actually external to them. They need to be kind of told, or it has to be enforced from outside, that morality. So be that religion, be that government, whatever it may be, the moral, their moral standing is completely dependent on what they're being told from outside. So just kind of, and it was an interesting article. I haven't read it in quite some time, but kind of just a different way of looking, talking about the same thing, more or less.
And we see how that is actually a really important concept to try to get your head around in the context of social or collective events which have happened in the past and which we may be moving towards now, which, an example, I mean, we've already spoken about it, Nazi Germany, right? And you wonder, I mean, when people read that in the history books, I'm interested to know how people believe that came about. How people believe, because if you ask anyone on the street, 99.999% of people, aside from those who proclaim themselves to be Nazis, the large majority of people are going to say that they would not have supported something like the Holocaust, right? Yet, how did you have a large proportion of German citizens, seemingly accepting that and not doing anything about it and actually supporting it? It's like, well, if you take into consideration this idea of the moral endoskeleton or moral exoskeleton or authoritarianism, the people who need that external morality or rely on that external morality almost, well, when that external system of morality is good, then they are good, right? Whereas when you have a situation that becomes pathological, you have the authority figures no longer are good, but in fact are highly pathological. You have Hitler, you have communist Russia, etc. When they become the authorities, that fundamental drive, or that fundamental kind of, this authoritarianism, the people who follow those authorities, who look to that external source for that morality, well, they then adopt the same values as whatever authority figure is currently in charge. And if those values are pathological, if they are unhealthy, then that is what these authoritarians, or this kind of the moral exoskeleton portion of the population, will adopt. That makes any sense. So then you have a situation where things can go downhill very quickly. You can go from a previously healthy society to actually, setting up the stage for some terrible atrocities to occur without many people blinking an eyelid. Because, it's a real mess.
Frequently, it creeps in so slowly that most people, if they're not paying attention, they don't really notice what is happening. Like the window just moves over ever so slowly. Like we've been doing this show for what, 6-7 years? Long time. And, there have been people around who have been looking into this kind of things for 20, 30 years, or longer than a lot of us who have been born. So to us, it's not really a surprise. We saw that they were laying the framework or the foundation for what is happening right now for years and years, like way before we even started doing this show. But most people don't pay attention to that. And so to them, it just seems like, oh, okay, another year passed and another year passed. But for us, we look at it and we see the slow creep of everything that's been coming about. And unless you've studied history or you've talked to your ancestors who have probably lived through tyranny, you have no idea.
Yeah.
And it's easy to fall into the trap.
Very easy. Especially when your comfort is at stake, I can just stay home and I can watch my Netflix and I can, use my toilet paper or whatever. I'm okay. You know what I mean? But it's like any sort of looking into the future about what these kind of laws and control mechanisms will mean in 10 or 15 years. It's like, oh, that's a no-go subject. I don't want to think about that. Everything's going to go back to normal, and it's really, I even said recently to a coworker who, said, oh, I just can't wait to get back to normal. I said, but do you remember 9/11? Because this is like 9/11 on steroids. You know what I mean? And then, oh, you think so? Completely shocked. Didn't even think about the possibility that, we wouldn't go back to normal.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It reminds me of, I know we're coming up on time now, but just reminds me of something Jordan Peterson has said in the past. I think it's really important for us all to keep a close track on reality, keep up to date with what's going on and the developments, and actually observing other people, observing the social dynamics, observing the authoritarians. It's a very important exercise. And it brings me back to talking about authoritarians. This Jordan Peterson in the past, if I remember the example he gave, is about an SS officer, or being like a Nazi officer in the concentration camps. He says, if you believe that you would not be one of those, if that would not be you, then the chances are you probably would have been one of those, right? In that we all have these tendencies, or we all have, there's always the possibility that we could very much go down that path. It's an easy path to take, and that we have to continually kind of, observe reality, observe what's going on, and keep a level head so that we're not swept up in the hysteria, and so that we are not, so that we don't lose track of ourselves, right? So we don't lose ourselves. If that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think, does anyone else have anything else on this topic they want to say?
No.
Well, not anything that can be summed up in a short amount of time. I think that a lot of these order followers, or these people who think that it couldn't have been them, I never would have been an SS guard or a member of the Gestapo or the Brown Shirts or anything like that. I think that these people who actually were, it's like they've compartmentalized their minds. Like they're following orders, and it's not really them who's carrying out the orders. It's just some robot that steps in and takes their place. And then at the end of the day, they can go home and have dinner with their families and not even think about the fact that they just, delivered an electric shock to somebody or something like that. But I think that people who are capable of doing such things, I don't think that they think that it's them who's actually doing this. Like some entity called the government has taken them over, and it's the government that's acting through them. It's not them personally. Maybe that's how they rationalize it. I don't know. Anyway, that's all I have to say about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, if that's everything for this week, then yeah, I hope people found that interesting. Keep a close eye out. I hope that now, this, if you haven't already looked at Bob Altemeyer's work, then take a look at it. I'm pretty sure the free ebook is online, or it's a free PDF of the book. It's been a couple of years since I read it, but it's an excellent book, and it does give you good insight into what you might be seeing and you might not be able to make sense of. I know it can be, very confusing to see the way that people behave, and at the same time, it can make you really frustrated. But if you have a bit of a better theoretical understanding of the kind of thing that goes on, or the kind of driving forces behind that in terms of psychology, then it can help you to understand it and actually to observe it, and to avoid it, right? So, yeah, as always, knowledge protects.
Yeah. And if you don't remember anything else, remember, snitches get stitches.
Exactly.
Yeah, and in times like these, we have to be cautious about, what we're doing these days, because you never know, round the corner, there may be someone who is jumping on the opportunity to, to snitch on you, kind of thing. Yeah. That wouldn't be good, would it?
No. For not wearing a mask.
Yeah, so, okay, if you like this video or you found it helpful, please like and subscribe to our page. You can find us on Facebook, and we'll be making another show like this. We put one out most weeks. So, yeah, if there's any recommendations, drop them in the comments. And until then, thanks to my co-hosts. We will see you next time.
See ya.
Bye, guys.